The fact that I'm able to speak in front of so many students at this bird's eye view lecture is a great honor. But I'm also feeling a little bit nervous now. What is GX? And some people also ask me, what is D&I? Do you know what D&I is? This is diversity and inclusion. And do you know what GX is? There are so many abbreviations. What GX represents is green transformation. As SDGs is a big issue under the UN, and these are goals that we tried to achieve in 2030, which I will explain later on. There are 17 goals under SDGs, not just focusing on emerging countries or developing countries, but also countries that have developed. They share the same issues, and this is one of the important keywords under the SDGs. We share common issues, and now how do we find solutions? Well, when we consider specific policies to find solutions, the status of development or economical power of each country will have an impact. Now, COP27 was held, and you know that there was a lot of discussions. I don't think you read newspapers anymore, but the newspapers reported that the environmental issues go beyond national borders. However, although they go beyond borders, there are systems, the political systems, the government systems, that are designed differently for different countries within each border. Now, people are allowed to move across borders. And when people move to specific systems of the different countries, their movement will have an impact on how they live. So it's like within a map, and we have to consider what is diversity. Diversity, translated to tayose in Japanese. Why do we have to consider diversity and growth in this concept? Now, as was mentioned earlier, my specialty is sociology. By the time I started working in the United States, I was working on sociology. And from the late 80s to early 90s, I was in the United States within the field of sociology. The major changes started in the 60s and 70s, and the 80s and 90s was a time when the United States was engaging in various experiments. But in the meantime, the war in Vietnam had a very important meaning in society. And of course, what is democracy? That's the discussion that took place in the United States when the war in Vietnam started, and then it was taken as a source of social issues. For young people in the United States, what was the positioning of the world? That's what they were discussing in the 1960s and afterwards. Now you see the war in Ukraine. You also see in various parts of the society where wars are occurring. That's today. How do you feel about the situation? Well, as a conclusion, first I have to say that when you hear the word war, you would think of wars among countries or wars in history. But what I always say in my lecture is to please think about the following. A 10-year-old child in Ukraine is not responsible for what is happening, but they still have to lose their life. At only 10 years old, please do think about it again. We are the adult generation. We should consider that we are responsible for what is happening. If you hear about this, you may feel some responsibility in what we have to think of. I've been talking and studying social hierarchy based on inequality. But when you think of international conflict, it started from the disputed territories or the concept or relations which are important historical elements in any conflicts and wars. But when there are differences, do we accept the difference or not? These could be some very fundamental issues over many years, over a long time. Human beings have thought of those issues. However, unfortunately, we are still far from finding solutions to those situations arising from differences. Now, I talked about hierarchy, and the society is not a plain dimension in economics. The modern economics is to consider market, which you can think as supply and demand, to begin discussions in economics. But in sociology or in social sciences, the market itself is not unilateral, but it comes in layers and hierarchy. So you have to consider those additive situations. You go from bottom to top, but people are individuals, and when individuals are together, they become populations, which form into a pyramid. However, in the pyramid, you find your father or your mother, and you have your grandparents or grandmother. There are different people that live in society, as a population in the form of a pyramid and within families. You have been raised and have grown to be an adult, and they are relatives within the population. So there are some people who have grown within a society. Now, there are differences in how you have grown, but there are differences. Considering fairness and equality, there is inequality, and disparity is not just a difference. They are given different ranks, but academically, the considered inequality is one of the major concepts. Since there is inequality against equality, it's considered not fair. When someone is born on this earth and they grow up, there are a lot of things that are considered to be unfair. And this is something we should not condone from the perspective of social sciences. And these differences, it's not just about the simple difference between men and women. Of course, we will talk about gender today, but there's masculine-female and female-like male. And also, what kind of lives should we live? Maybe there's someone who says she's a girl, but she doesn't really smile. But what is the concept of kawaii or cute? There are a lot of different values overlaying those different differences, and this is something that we have to consider, which is absurdity. In Japan, there are differences. In the 1970s or the latter half of the 60s, one of the key words that characterized Japan was homogeneous society, or society centered around two groups. So differences and individuals were not given a lot of priority in Japanese society. That's what people say. In the 1960s, Japan's economy grew dramatically, which was considered a miracle after they lost lots of things in World War II, and Japan then became the second largest economic power, following the United States, which was very successful. So this was a historical fact. But why was Japan, such a small island nation, able to do this? It's because we were a homogeneous society. Everyone was going for one goal, and that's why we were able to achieve economic growth in such a short period of time. And democracy was one thing that we observed after the war. But in Japan, we were not so much focused on that conceptual thing, and we were more focused on economics. We wanted everyone to become more prosperous, so economic growth was the #1 priority. And we had this plan to double people's income, and we front-loaded all these plans to achieve this. And diversity, individual differences, these were not given priority. Rather, we really focused on economic growth. And as a part of it, men spent most of their time working at companies and were considered to be company warriors. And this was possible because a woman was doing household chores, raising their children, taking care of their families. There was this other person who was taking care of all these household-style household chores. And this was how Japan was able to grow their economy, because there was a division of labor. And we were able to achieve certain things under those circumstances. But there were some things we were not able to achieve. What we recently hear is women's empowerment. And what's good about that is... I'm sorry, it's not really shown on the slide. The former Prime Minister Abe's government came up with this goal of empowering women. And in the 1960s, when the economy was growing, this was possible because women were not really working outside of their homes. They were taking care of their families at home. But now, in the 2000s, after the financial crisis, the Japanese economy was experiencing a slowdown. As the population was declining at the same time, the government came up with this women's empowerment because they thought that, in order to grow the economy again, we need to have women. But the problem was that the assessment of women was not really diversified. The way that women could lead their lives was not really diversified. And this was behind the policy that has been raised. Now, why do we have to talk about gender disparity? This is because women have been disadvantaged. But that's not all over. Japan is going to be the most aged society, and we have to go through a new change. But for now, what do we need? In the past, the concerns, ideas, and opinions were not reflected as gender. Another gender issue that we have never discussed should now be prioritized for consideration. Otherwise, in the past, over many years, men and women were not offered the same choices. Now we have to make the difference, and that strategy is diversity. But where do we have to focus? The growth we will achieve in the future should not be through old ways. It has to be in a new way. Young people like yourselves in this country will make new growth in the future. It's up to you to develop blueprints for future growth. So it's for you. The steady state society is responsible. You are the main players, and you will have to think of the growth in the future too. But to achieve this, we have to consider gender. Another gender which was not in play. They need to be incorporated in a very active way for future development. That's what is happening today as a main wave, and that should be my conclusion. Why do we need to be diverse? Why do we need diversification? Well, in the past, we talked about desirability. What is men like? What is women like? Feminine or masculine? And when women are employed, what they say is, we need a feminine perspective, woman-like perspective. But what does woman-like mean? What is feminine? We don't know. And when they think of femininity, Those are the new perspectives that men did not have in the past. Another issue is the pandemic. We have to stop the flow of people, which means the service industry experienced a very hard hit. There is a difference from the recession after the Lehman shock. Now, the inequalities between men and women have become very clear during the pandemic because of those reasons. Now, when people lived together, the women had to spend more time on household tasks. Although women have new ideas and awareness and assessment. Those perspectives may be closely related to everyday life. Now, I'm not ignoring LGBTQ. I'm focusing on men and women, but I'm not ignoring that issue. But for now, I will focus. Now, do men have the same level of awareness as women? I'm sure that there is a lot men could not recognize because they did not spend much time at home. And what women do realize or learn from housework may lead to new businesses. And now we talk about the green transformation. It's green ecology and environment. It's new and related to what women have learned from home. Life may be utilized here, and it could be a good target of investment. And therefore, women could be a very good human resource. As we engage in green transformation, does that mean we don't need men? No, that's not the case, because there are generational differences. The people from my generation, we have men of my age, but your age, you, the young people, both men and women, must have different feelings and senses and awareness from my generation. Now, in diversity or diversification, we should be actively utilizing what you have in your generation, and desirability in your generation must be different from what we have. You may need to achieve convergence of values, but right now, the values are very closely related with vested rights from the previous generation. So we need to change. But when do we have to change? How will we change? It must be realized within many conflicts. But the conclusion is we have no time to wait. We cannot wait anymore. Now there are such concepts as affirmative action or encouraging activities for women. Those are the concepts, but how do we achieve it? Very fundamentally. For example, at the University of Tokyo, you know that the entrance examination has been an issue for undergraduates. Well, there may have to be some preferential treatment. Perhaps it was time limitations, but even you cannot naturally change. You may need to approach both from top and bottom. But to change the top, you also have to start from the base. You have to accelerate the broadening of the base, because if you just change the top, it will give you the concept of the vested rights and preferential treatments. So you have to tackle from different angles. But if that is the case, who will be disadvantaged? That is the question. So who's going to take first place, and who is going to give some group preferred advantages? So this is something that you can also talk about. This is data that we use in social sciences. Microdata analysis. We're doing experimental demonstration and experiments. I think it's better to show you the data to really understand the backgrounds. And this is the data from 2020. And this is the demographic pyramid based on the census, meaning that we did the survey for all the households from age 0 to 100 years old. So, numbers, and the point here is, I'll be very quick. In 1960, the demographic pyramid was quite a stable shape, with a lot of numbers at the bottom. But now it's different. Birth rate has come down, and that's why we have this form. So the population comes from three groups. Younger group at the very bottom, shrinks from 0 to 14. This group, in order to keep the current population, the virtual birth rate that we need is 2.04, or even less. And currently, birth rate is 1.4, or even less. And the birth rate has been coming down from the 1970s. It was very low, below that standard. And then this is the productive age. These are the people who are supporting the society. And because we are short on labor, therefore women in this age group should also be working. And this is the older group, above 65 years old. So if people retire at the age of 65, they're considered to be the older group. I'm very close to that age group, but I hope that I can contribute to society through my research. So the big difference would be these two groups, the old age group and the younger age group. And another point to look at is that whether they will be born a boy or a girl is a 50-50 chance. But who's going to live longer? There's a difference between men and women. So we have more women in the old age group. So the aging society is really a women's issue, and it leads to the issue of the way we live and the forms of families. And here, of course, there's a lot of different forms of family. Maybe there is a mother of age 30 and a father. And also maybe grandma, grandmother, and grandfather living here, and they form a community. And then, when you go to college, the rate of going to the universities is like this. Well, this is a very nice university here, and I understand that there's a very nice program prepared here. So it's a nice thing that we have such opportunities from university. So we can maximize those opportunities and the university rate. More women are going to college nowadays because in the 1960s and 70s, women had these 2-year colleges. So parents thought that it was okay to send their girls to their 2-year women colleges. And when you look at the labor market, there were not many opportunities for women to work, even if they graduated from 4-year colleges. But now, the rate gap of students going to colleges between boys and girls is narrowing. But it doesn't mean that everything is okay because of that. If you look at it in more detail by the departments and faculties, you can see that there is a difference by area. For example, in the medicine or social sciences, or engineering, for example, Professor Okoshi was engineering, they have fewer women internationally. But Japan stands out in that regard, and when it comes to femininity, maybe because we have such, so this is an issue of the social science. And here we are looking at the ratio of women by the university in different disciplines. And I didn't have time to put together an Excel format. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to translate all the names of the countries. But when it comes to natural science and mathematics and statistics, Japan is here. It's always like this when it comes to science faculty. It's very low. So it's 17%, 23%, 27%, or 16%. So this is, I see, it's very low actually. We have very few men as well, and we're really behind from the industry perspective. Japan is really lagging behind in this area as well. This is quite a serious situation. And why do we have such a big gender gap when it comes to engineering? 84% are men. And why is this the case? And this is the gap, wage gap, in Japan compared to South Korea. And this is South Korea. Japan followed South Korea. When the bar is high, the disparity is large. And when you're looking at the median value, based on OECD data, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, those are the countries where the disparity is not so large. But even in the United States, it's not so low compared to Japan, as you can see here. Now, looking at the next table, this shows how women work, and how women work as part-timers among all workers. You see Japan, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, followed by Germany and other countries. Those are the countries where more women work as part-time employees. But the disparity in wages is quite large between men and women. But if you look at the Netherlands or some other countries, or even Switzerland, it's low. In the Netherlands, there are more people working as part-timers. So how is a part-timer positioned within the labor market? It depends on the policies. It's 1.5 in the model of the Netherlands. This is 1.5 from a model. 1 may be for a husband and 0.5 may be for the wife. Or it could be the other way around. But that's a model. Or it could be 0.75 each for husband and wife. This is the model that they have. But in Japan, an overwhelming majority of part-timers are women. And after the Lehman shock, there was a topic of disparities between full-time employees and part-time employees. In Japan, part-time employees are mostly women. And the problem is that in the 1980s, around that time, it was after the bubble economy. There was a shortage in the labor force in manufacturing industries. That is why they have expanded the part-time employees. They're mostly in blue colors, but if you go to factories, you find the middle-aged women, the middle-aged men work in uniforms. But the people working online, the middle-aged women working as part-timers, the working hours were comparable, but with clear differences in the wage and various benefits. And the professor, Marie Osawa of University of Tokyo, the researchers in social policy, says she pointed out such disparities, especially at the factories. Another aspect is the number of females in management. If you make international collaboration in early states, you may find vice presidents in incorporated corporations. The size of management is very small in Japan, so you cannot make a head-to-head comparison in this case. But still, the percentage of female management is quite low compared to others. So that's another difference. And another thing is the working hours. I already told some about this, and you're looking at the differences in mean values. On the left, you find the paid work and unpaid work. These are the two major differences in the type of work economically. You find sleeping hours and other lifestyle workers, the recreational hours. There are different categories, but when you look at the unpaid work, this is mainly for household chores, childcare, and elderly care for a different age bracket. You're looking at the average unpaid work for different age groups, comparing male and female. 1976 is the blue bar. This is after the rapid economic growth, where Japan was to move in away from the growing economy. That's in the 1970s, after the oil shock, after the Middle East, and they're looking at the average values completely. There's a difference. This is men's average time spent on unpaid work. While in 2016, if you look at the data, it's 36.21. It's U-shaped. 65 and older men are more engaged in household work or unpaid work. Now specifically, this is for elderly care. And this is usually for childcare. But still, for a younger generation, although there is an increase, it's still only 1/3 of men. And when it comes to elderly care is often considered to be the work of women. But stably, 1/3 of men are involved in elderly care and care for the spouse. The wife needing care and husband giving care. Another thing is the sons caring for, married men caring for their parents. So it's not just women involved in elderly care, but because of society, many men are caring for their parents. Because it's a U-shape, meaning that people in the working age group are not really involved in this kind of care work. On the other hand, if you look at the paid labor, when it comes to younger growth, it's your home. So it's almost equal with women. And one way to look at this, you can see that the gap between men and women is narrowing. But if you go above 30 years old, of course it's going up. But if you look to women in their 40s, it's coming down. So a woman is working if they are working in a support role. And this situation has not really changed in the past 40 years, so from a macro point of view, it has not changed. From a macro point of view, you cannot really expect society to change. You can see that at our university. This percentage of women have become a vice president or something. Well, these are some of the individual episodes. Unless we can change on a macro basis, you cannot expect the society to change as a whole. Japan has not really seen a major change in its base. The question is, why is this happening? And I'll go very quick because we're running out of time. This is the green transformation. And this is something that the United Nations is working on mainly. And every year it's being reviewed about how much progress was made against the target. There's a report every year. And there are specific numbers. It's very clear this is a number that's been put together by the UN. For example, this number one poverty, 380 million are living in poverty. And some have health issues. And then hunger. Or clean water. Things that are related to the environment. If you view it from a gender perspective, you can find out that there are some inequalities. Because when you think about gender, you tend to focus on small things, like the way we work or the jobs, but that's not only the case. So this could also involve issues such as immigration, nationalities, and international issues. So within the population, there are 3 factors: birth rate, death rate, and international movement rate. And what are the ethnic nationalities within this international movement rate? And are those people being given equal opportunities or options to choose? If they don't have the options to choose, they will not be able to deliver results. So we're looking at these differences as a result. This wage gap, or the difference in the preferences. These are some of the results that we see, but is this something that we should look at, something that people choose freely? Being able to choose freely is a very important thing. However, it's not really guaranteed. And I think this is a big issue. For example, do you have access to clean water at all times? This is not actually common. It's not available everywhere in the world. For example, clean air as well. Someone has to pump up the water. This is hard work, but this is something that a woman has to do. People say a woman doesn't have stamina. It's not a question of stamina or power, but it requires a lot of effort. But because pumping of water is considered less valuable, considered compared to hunting, that's why a woman has to do that part of the job. So you can see that. You can see these differences in results are not based in rational reasoning. And that's why we have this inequality. And it's very unfortunate we are, killing these opportunities, although there was a potential. So what we need to do is to create an environment where we will be able to unleash the potential as much as we can. And this is what's behind the affirmative actions, the options that were not given on equal terms. It's really about giving those options to people who are not given those opportunities to pass and give opportunities to unleash their potential they weren't given. So in the past, some people say that it's unfair because men are not given opportunities because of this affirmative action. But if we want to create a good future, we need to focus on all the households. But in those cases, we need to provide these kinds of opportunities to those people who are under absurd circumstances. I don't think it's unfair. And there are some cases where we do a survey of women if they want to become managers, and many answer less than 10% of the women say they want to. Well, oftentimes the questions are not right, because you never ask those questions to men. And in case if you ask a male employee, see, we want to be a management, 30% would say yes. And for women, it's much less. But that is because of the situation they're answering. Now, to be management is to participate in decision-making. And if there is diversity in the people making decisions, the outcome, the decisions would be better because the aspects that were never noticed before could be reflected in the decision. However, as a goal for 30%, for example, if 30% of management is female, things will not change that easily. So 30% may be a target, but you have to support after reaching that 30%. And that support should be given to both men and women. Being diverse means that the people, the situation of the people who are never a majority before, the minority people, their situations need to be actively considered. In other words, there needs to be a preferential consideration for the people who are minorities within a large society. What should be the dynamics of moving people? The people who were previously minority people up there should bring new ideas. And needs to be global, cross-border efforts to create rules. And we would like to have as many people as possible to be able to formulate such a program to move towards diversity, and diversity had not been tolerated in Japan. So you need to change that. Therefore, diversity is not a simple difference, and being diverse means that you consider the existence of minority people sufficiently. That would have to be achieved as a macroscopic general perspective. So initially you introduce equal access. And because this is a bird's eye view lecture, I have to say that several years ago was the first year students have done something. This is what we are doing right now. You have a wonderful opportunity to be a part of this program. I hope that you will have gratitude and to make the best use of the opportunity of the bird's eye lectures. But this is something you have to be willing to learn. You have to be willing to try yourself rather than just waiting. And just surveying this is not sufficient. You have to keep in mind what you do in the survey, for you need to know what your objectives are. By doing so, you'll be able to be a part of the program, and you will have a much wider imagination, able to learn more about society. This concludes my lecture.